Hey everyone, welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time, which, well, it probably is. For the second video, I wanted to talk about radiation in general, or radiation in space, but it's a pretty big topic, like things like the sources of radiation, how it's produced, primary and secondary, the nature of radiation, because there's particles, electromagnetic waves and stuff, or how it affects humans, electronics, and so on and so forth. It's a bit too much for one video, so after about 3 takes ending up 40 minutes after post-processing, I decided to just focus on one thing, which would be electromagnetic radiation, aka light, within and outside the visible spectrum, so, infrared, X-rays, all that good stuff. So, light itself is complicated. It can behave sometimes like a particle and sometimes like a wave, but I don't want to get too deep into that. What we need to keep is from the particle side, it does come in packets or quanta, single particles of light, and these we call photons. From the wave side of things, each of these photons has a characteristic frequency. If it is oscillating fast, and the oscillations are in the electromagnetic field, then it has a lot of energy, so that's a high frequency. Or if it is oscillating slowly, if it has low frequency, that is low energy. This energy is tied to the color of the light. Red is generally low energy, well, actually always low energy, whereas blue is high energy light. And actually, at the very edge of what we can see is violet. If it is lower energy than red, it is infrared, below red. If it is higher energy than blue, it is ultraviolet, above violet. And as you push further into ultraviolet, you get into X-rays, which can penetrate through soft tissue, and gamma rays, which are positively destructive and lethal. In infrared, the differences between the different frequencies are a bit more nuanced, but we tend to name them based on the different applications we use them for. For example, we use microwaves, not only for our microwave oven to warm up last night's pizza, but also for telecommunications. We have radio waves that we use for, well, radio. There is also the TV frequencies, very high and ultra high frequency, VHF and UHF. They're definitely not thinking very far ahead when they were doing that, because we're operating way higher than ultra high frequency nowadays. Radar is used in airports, ports, ships, and even in detecting space debris. And of course, there is what we conventionally know as infrared, which is closer to the visible spectrum with thermal infrared and with near infrared. So we have made devices that can sense things in all of these frequencies across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. We even have cameras that can visualize microwaves, even though that is a very niche application. But humans themselves, they evolved to see in this particular part of the spectrum, which we call visible light, for, I think, rather obvious reasons. And I do hope you believe in evolution, otherwise we're going to have a problem here. Right, but who is to say that aliens evolved in the same conditions? Different stars, different light, different environments, different atmospheres. All of these things might mean that a different part of the spectrum is ideal for aliens. When we try to visualize alien vision in television, it's a lot of vision, we usually see heat signatures. We see them seeing in thermal infrared. So you've got the human that is trying to walk about stealthily, but wherever they step, they leave a hot footprint. Wherever they touch, they leave a palm print. Now, what the aliens are seeing in this case might be thermal infrared, but who's to say that they do not see in some other part of the spectrum, like near infrared, like cameras, or in radio waves, or in UV light. So I propose to you that if aliens can see in different parts of the spectrum, they will probably make also stuff like art in those parts of the spectrum. We use all the colors that we see, so they probably do too. But to take it a step further, to add some narrative drama, they might also have signs using different parts of the spectrum. We use, for example, yellow to draw attention to something. We also use red to denote danger. So if the humans or the aliens have a specific color for a specific kind of sign that says perhaps something like, careful when you're docking, we have volatile materials on board, and the other species does not see that because, well, it's outside of the spectrum that they can see, you might end up having something like the aurora borealis at this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the station, localized entirely within your docking bay. Artistic and life-extending communications aside, there might be some other considerations and applications for all of these different kinds of light. For example, you may paint yourself to become very well camouflaged for humans, but then you might find out that in infrared you stand out like a sore thumb. Or perhaps you're just transparent or you're completely absorbent, so again you stand out for the opposite reason. Painting stuff in infrared paint is something we're already doing because, as mentioned before, well, we can actually sense in infrared through our technology. So you may well want to disguise yourself also in that part of the spectrum. And this might also be a narrative opportunity to maybe highlight a danger. Perhaps one of the dumber characters does his camouflage with due diligence, but forgets to apply the infrared part. Doesn't look any different to them, right? It's a good opportunity to show that these aliens, they do not just see in invisible colors without using a cheesy infrared thermal camera shot, and raise the stakes, showing that there are some invisible things to take into account. There's always some bonus anxiety when you have to take care of things that you absolutely cannot see. Now, if all of this is sounding interesting to you, I do have a small exercise I can propose so that you can maybe get a glimpse of how things might be different for the aliens compared to you. Take a few pictures in different environments, city, forest, whatever, and then go into your favorite image editing program that is a little bit more advanced than Paint. This could be Paint.net, Krita, my personal favorite, GIMP if you're a masochist, or if you have something paid like Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint, awesome, that works too. And go into the color channels and isolate one channel, like drop red and blue so you can see only green. And do that for each of the channels and see what is different, what appears different in each of these channels, what stands out more, what blends into the background. This will give you an idea of why it might be important to see in some part of the spectrum and not some other. You can actually take this a step further and either look up some infrared images online, or you can even buy an infrared camera. There are cameras that you can just plug into your phone with a USB that go for about $100. Now, at the end of the day, this series is called Sci and the Fi, so I am gonna be talking about science, which I kind of have, but not aliens. So how do we use these things in science? Well, the thing is, because exactly you see different stuff in different parts of the spectrum, and I have not even talked about spectral lines and emission and absorption from different chemical elements, we can look at the stars, for example, for something a bit closer to home for me. And you can look them in the hydrogen alpha region, or you can look at them in X-rays, and you can see different things. Molecular clouds in space absorb some parts of the spectrum. Other parts of the spectrum will blast clean through. Some stars are emitting strongly in X-rays or gamma rays if they're super energetic right now, whereas others will not emit at all. And so we can use these things. We layer these different pictures in different spectra, and we create these composite false color pictures where usually you've got maybe one color being actual red, and then another color channel, like the blues represent maybe X-rays, and the greens represent, I don't know, infrared. And by playing with these things, you can highlight different features. You can make stars that would be lost inside the background pop up a lot more. Another very pertinent application is spectroscopy. I want to make a separate video on that one. It's actually a very fascinating subject, at least to me it is. But I will say for now that you can, based on the frequencies coming off of something, tell what that is made of, to a very good extent, actually. But another property that I have touched upon briefly is thermal radiation, or blackbody radiation. And that is actually radiated away from us and from everything that has a temperature. It's not reflected, and we don't change our reflection based on how hot we are. Otherwise, Brad Pitt in 2005 would probably have blinded the whole set. Now, at our humble temperatures around us, thermal infrared is well below what we can see. In fact, the whole band between normal thermal infrared and what we can see is called near infrared, which is actually very useful in its own right, because some things, for example, plants, are a lot more reflective in near infrared, or more consistently reflective than they are in even shades of green. So satellites, for example, have near infrared when they want to map out how much plant life there is about. But thermal itself is called blackbody radiation also because even something completely painted black that will reflect nothing, it will absorb everything, will still emit stuff. And that depends only and purely on its temperature. Now, while at room temperature this is way outside what we can see, this rather outlandish concept actually starts making sense when you think about blacksmiths, where the iron is red hot, or welders, or steel mills, or, I don't know, lava volcanoes, or the sun. So this starts out at about 800 degrees Celsius, where things start glowing red hot, and then as they get to 1,000, they start getting more orangey and yellow, and then towards 3,000, it's more or less white, and then as you start hitting 7,000 and above, they start looking bluish. So I'm going to show you a color temperature map. Note that in this case, instead of frequency, it has wavelength. That is the inverse of frequency. So low wavelength means high energy, high frequency, and high wavelength means low frequency and low energy. And there is the peak of the curve that gives us a characteristic color, but it also emits a lot beneath that peak, and even a little bit above. But most of it is centered on that peak, so that color dominates. So when you're seeing white, that means that the peak is somewhere inside the visible spectrum, and it's pretty much covering it somewhat evenly. If you see blue, you're actually getting a lot of emission outside the visible spectrum on the UV side, and it's just that because there is less as you go to lower energies, blue is dominant. Similarly for red, there is a lot of emission beneath. The peak might be beneath, but red is the main thing that bleeds into the visible spectrum. Now, you can use this information in your creative endeavors or when you're fact-checking your favorite sci-fi to identify a star. How hot is it and what is it supposed to be emitting? So for example, a red star might be one of two things. It might be a red dwarf, which is a rather small star, which never had the mass and the pressure to start fusing at the same intensity as our sun. So it never got the high temperatures that our sun has, and it's instead glowing at much lower energy levels. On the other hand, there's also red giants. These are very big stars in dimensions, but the mass might be something similar to our sun. In fact, our sun is predicted to start puffing up eventually after a few billion years. These stars are actually at the later parts of their life. They have burned a lot of the hydrogen at the core, and now they're starting to burn helium into lithium, and that's not quite as effective, so there's not quite that much energy coming out from within, and so their temperature actually drops and they become red. On the far side of the spectrum, there are white dwarfs. White dwarfs have a lot more mass, which means that they have a lot more gravity and pressure. And this pressure is also encouraging the fusion, and altogether this leads to much higher temperatures, which is why their peak emission is further into the visible spectrum, or perhaps even outside the visible spectrum. Now, while I have not really said anything that is useful for the mass of the star, you can already use this to correlate the color of the star to what parts of the spectrum aliens might be seeing in this particular environment. And in some future video, I will in fact talk about orbital mechanics and tides and so on, so we will also explore ways to use the mass of the star as part of the narrative. Now, in this channel, I am trying to bring together storytelling and science to explore science through stories that we tell, and enhance stories that we tell with science. You don't really need any of this for good storytelling. You can still write a great story without knowing all of this stuff. But I do encourage people to, in the words of Dan Brown, know what you write. Dive into the subject and learn about it. And that gives you so many more opportunities to not just make your storytelling more robust, but also inspiration for more plots, for more ideas, for more intricate and interesting and unexplored, never done before scenarios. So whether you're just an enjoyer of Star Trek, The Expanse, or Star Wars, or whatever, or you're a creator yourself, a fanfic writer, a professional author, you're writing for film or television, a game developer, I do encourage you to dive a little bit into the subject. There's a lot of talented YouTubers out there, way more talented than me, with much better production teams than me, that have such great videos in so much detail. There is really not that much effort that needs to be done, except to search and listen. So with the hopes that I have given you a little bit of inspiration for your own world building, or perhaps something to look out for next time you're watching a movie, I will leave you for now, and hopefully for less than 6 months this time. Be seeing you. Homer out.